It is now 6:30, and I'd like to welcome everybody to 2022, our first school board meeting of the year. And I would call this meeting to order and I would seek approval of the agenda as it's placed before us tonight.
I move to approve the agenda as published.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Approved. Public comment. Brian, did we get anybody that wants to speak? There's no public comment. Let's get right into it then. 4.1, social emotional learning update. Dr. Haslam, take us away. Go ahead. Do it however you see fit. Got a handout for it also. Put it up here.
We don't have enough. Cody.
I got it. I got it.
Oh, okay. I think I only got 5 of the other section.
Oh, yeah, no.
Just here. Okay.
All right. Let me go to the projector here. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so my name is Cody Aspis. Cody Aspis, Director of School Improvement Associate Superintendent. I have our SCL team with me tonight to give a quick overview of a social emotional learning update, not only from the district perspective, but also within each building. Some PD that we've engaged in over the past couple of years, some PD that we're currently engaged in, and some other PD that we're foreshadowing here in the near future. So before we get started, let's have each member here share their name and then also their position relative to our SCL.
I'm Brady Davis. I teach the core multi-age over at Central, and I'm the Central. I'm Emily Shuka. I teach 7th grade language arts, and I'm in the middle school SCL. I'm Katie Wharton. I'm the high school integrated science teacher, and I'm the SCL leader at school. I'm Emily Kersey, school counselor at the elementary, and I get to be the SCL consultant.
So just to get started, keeping with our Capturing Hearts themes, we have a good things activity that I'll turn over to our group.
All right, so you got an interesting set of images here. So what we want you guys to do is kind of turn to your elbow partner and choose the image that best fits your current vibe. So as you think about getting back into, the post-break, winter break time, where are you at? Which picture best describes how you're feeling in this moment, and then share why, and then we'll kind of hop around and ask some people to share where they're at. So if you guys could share with your elbow partner, which one is you and why? Okay.
I also feel like that.
Groundhog Day with kids who are Bill Murray for coffee.
I was like, yes.
Charge.
They are like, that's cut apart a billion boxes and sharp objects and high blue and.
Look forward to you have success in this country.
Hopefully.
Yeah, good luck on that one.
All right. I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say. Anybody have any humorous descriptions of their pictures? Humorous descriptions of their pictures? What'd you guys choose?
I'll start. I said the skeleton drinking coffee because back at school, closing second semester, senior year, musical time, I'm fueled by caffeine. And you know what? I'm still here.
Yeah.
Yep.
All
So.
right. Still going. Okay. Anyone else?
I would say I agree with Ben on the picture. I have, being an empty nester now, it's just Jenny and I and cats. And so the routine is pretty predictable, and coffee is a food group. I agree with that. Or cat, well, yeah, whatever delivery method you have.
It's my 32.
All right.
You are consistent that way.
All right. Well, thank you guys very much.
All right, so some topics we'll cover here tonight. We'll define social emotional learning, also take a look at our district vision, and then also our implementation plan at each individual building. And each PD lead, SEL PD lead will actually go over that plan with you, where we've been, where we're currently at, and then also where we're going through in the near future for SEL implementation. And then we'll end with a quick little launch here, and then answer any questions all of you might have on our plan. So first, our definition of social emotional learning, and this is from the CASEL organization, which is the leading organization for social emotional learning implementation for school districts and buildings across the state. CASEL stands for Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning. It's kind of our go-to group, go-to resource, whether it's from webinars or different learning sessions that our group takes in to then work with our teachers and our faculty and staff, and also moving in with our students. So this organization's true definition of social emotional learning is essentially the process in which we work with our young people and also our adults to provide skills and knowledge, information, to then develop healthy identities for them as individuals, while also being able to manage themselves in a personal and a collective manner for attaining goals that they might have for the future. Also, a huge part of it is developing and showing and understanding what empathy for others looks like and feels like. Also within that is maintaining and developing supportive relationships, whether it's personal from a student to student, it could be with an adult, could also be with a family member, whether it's a sibling, father, son, mother, whichever it might be. But most importantly, we're trying to work with our students to develop a deep understanding of what relational capacity looks like from a relationship standpoint. And then most importantly, providing the skills necessary for our teachers and also our students to be responsible and caring in all decisions that they're making, not only with their process, but also their final product.
This is the castle deal. I wanted to show you this because when we talk about 5 competencies, or we talk about indicators throughout our presentation, this is what we're talking about. So this is the castle 5. There's self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision making. And those are kind of the 5 overarching competencies that we use in the state of Iowa to create our K-12 competencies and indicators. So the Iowa Department of Ed has created K-12 indicators, and I printed copies of those. Not that you want to sit and read those tonight, but just to give you an idea of how what we wrote there has a lot to do with our learner outcomes. They're very connected.
Our district vision for social emotional learning implementation directly falls in line with our community developed learner outcomes, which again are individual learners, collaborators, whole individuals, and world changers. The two really mix well with one another. Everything that we want our students to be and work towards falls directly in line with the vision and the inputs of necessary for social emotional learning and what we're kind of wanting our students to be, wanting our faculty members to act in all of these areas. So it really worked well with the 2 programs coming together and kind of directing our vision and continuing to move together as opposed to moving one way, one another way. It's a collective process moving together. Our goal is by the 2024-25 school year, we have full integration of social emotional learning within all PK-12 daily instruction. So it's not necessarily like a piece that's going to be here or there, or going to fall on Tuesdays every week, or maybe once a semester. It's going to be embedded within our daily instruction in every single classroom, every single day, for every single student. And our goal with this is for students and adults to rationalize and understand their thoughts, feelings, and emotions, while also developing self-awareness, and then falling back on that keyword empathy, and only for themselves, community, peers, school, but worldwide. And our biggest thing, again, that kind of falls in line with this, we want to be able to provide support for everybody we work with in our district to have success in and outside of the classroom. So with that, that's a lot of great verbiage here, but now we actually need our plan of action put into place to be able to reach each of these entities.
So SEL has become a buzzword in the last few years, and my goal is to do a lot of myth busting. There's a lot of myths out there about SEL, even among educators. And so this is a visual that I've used over and over again with multiple groups of people to kind of explain the 4 pieces of how an SEL framework or how SEL implementation really works in the district. If you have one of these legs going on, it's not SEL. It's not sufficient. Each are important, but not sufficient on their own. So explicit instruction is a lot of times what people think of when they think of SEL. You can buy curriculum, boxed curriculum, and it's great and it's research-based, and you can give that to your teachers and they teach it. It's a 30-minute lesson a week or so, and it's great skills to teach. That's explicit instruction, and that's a part of SEL, but that's not all that it is. I feel really good about where Innovate is going because we know that there's a lot more to SEL than that, rather than just buying a curriculum, handing it to teachers and saying, here, teach this to your kids. It's a lot more about what we do as adults for our kids and for our environment for our kids than what we do to kids. So explicit instruction, very important, but not sufficient on its own. The climate and culture, if you think capturing kids' hearts, that's a huge part of it. So the way that you create your environment, the routines and procedures that you have in your classroom, and the teaching practices that you use are a huge part of culture and climate. Integration, when you integrate some of the explicit skills that you've taught into your core curriculum, or you are, let's say in science, you're doing a group project and you've already explicitly taught about collaboration, what that means, or certain kind of communication, what that means. And now you're integrating that into your group science project. That's integration. It's when you're, like Cody did mention earlier, when you are doing this on a daily basis and it's just a part of the way that you teach and the way that you provide opportunities for kids, that's integration. That's really what we're going for overall. Parents and families are also really important. So, for example, at the elementary, we worked really hard to put on parent nights. We're doing it again this year. Getting opportunities for parents to engage in activities that promote social emotional learning. It can also be things like carnival or just things that help bring families together and help teach skills to kids around social emotional learning. So this tool is just one that I come back to over and over. I wish I actually had this tool in real life because I just carried it around with me.
Kind of a quick break with our implementation plan is just diving in a little bit deeper to what Emily said, understanding exactly what SCL is and what it isn't.
So as Emily said before, there's kind of like a buzz around SEL. It's talked about, I mean, podcasts, books, TV. And so we kind of wanted to specifically say what it is and what it's not. A few kind of common misunderstandings or misconceptions you see on the right-hand side. One very common one that I know I've seen and heard is that SEL is only for elementary level kids. And while SEL definitely should be seen and taught in the elementary, it doesn't just end once the kid, graduates 4th grade. It looks different in other grades and other buildings. However, it should definitely be taught throughout their education. So that's definitely a common misconception. Another misconception is that social and emotional skills should just be taught by parents. And while, yes, parents should and do teach a lot of these skills, as we know, a lot of kids come to us and they lack certain skills. And so that's when we need to kind of pick up and move them forward there. The next one, SEL is only for students who have behavior issues. SEL is not taught as a behavior discipline. It's for every student, every class, every child should receive social and emotional learning, no matter where they're at. Lastly, Emily kind of talked about this a little bit, but SEL is a 30-minute lesson each week from a curriculum. While it can look like that, that is definitely not all SEL is. There's a full picture, a full integration that needs to be taken up here.
So one thing here with our implementation plan is just kind of going back a little bit to my time as high school principal. I remember having a conversation with Kristen and I, and then also Lisa Hartman, who was the middle school principal at the time, with Justin Gross, who was in my position, about making some changes to our TLC program to have PD leads in each building specific to building and district initiatives. We had these people in place for some different things, but they didn't necessarily fall in line to directly what we were working on at the time. So we did make a switch prior to the 2020-21 school year of incorporating PD leads specific to district and building initiatives. Through last year, once the SEL team was created, it became very apparent that we needed to have some longevity with these positions because of the work that we made. We also needed to incorporate a higher number of professional development learning opportunities for our teachers guided by these individuals. So one huge change that we made was making this a 2-year position for everybody here. Instead of doing annually and having the chance of potentially exploring other options, we wanted to make sure that this was a point of emphasis. So we are in year 2 overall, but year 1 of 2 since making the switch to making this a 2-year position. Another huge part of this implementation plan was having our principals on board to allow us the opportunity to commit 8 PD learning opportunities of our total 32, I think. So essentially 1/4 of our PD Mondays devoted specifically to SEL learning for our teachers. And these individuals are leading that effort. Another important piece was training our PD leads. So they've done some different trainings directly from Castle did a 4-day webinar that was spread out over a month's time. Training through Castle. All of us, except for Randy, who was on maternity leave at the time, attended the Iowa Best Summit in November earlier this year, just to continue not only to learn more, but also grow our group as we continue to educate and work with our teachers and ultimately our students. So with that, turn over to Emily here for a little bit more insight here on our kind of 5-year plan.
So Tori and I sat down, I think, years ago now, and kind of wrote out what our 5-year plan generally should look like. And the buildings are all in different places, but the thing that I learned from the research that I've done is that you have to start with adults. And SEL is more about how you teach, what practices you use, what strategies you use as a teacher, and your competencies as an individual, as a teacher, and how you portray that and how you foster kids' growth in social emotional learning. So that's where we started at the elementary. We started there in 2018-19, and that was really about the framework and understanding the competencies. In middle school last year, there was kind of an introduction, just like here's what's coming next year, but really they're in that first year of introducing that framework, along with year 2, where we're introducing adult SEL, self-growth, boosting your own competency areas, and then also the most important part, I think, is the teaching practices. So there are 10 teaching practices that we're really focusing on that help foster social emotional learning in your classroom, and that's where high school and middle school are both working on this year. We did the teaching practices the first 2 years, and last year at Central we focused on equity and student competencies. The work around equity, I mean, we did some of that explicit instruction, but that's never done. That's a really important part of it. And so that's where high school, middle school will be going next year. Year 4, so the elementary is in year 4, and kind of year 5, we're piloting the DESA, which is a way to assess social emotional learning for our students. So we are currently implementing a universal instruction. So all of our teachers are teaching a research-based SEL program once a week in their classrooms. That's the first year we're doing this. And then we're also using the DESA to assess. So kind of putting those two things together, it's been a huge learning year for us, and we're growing and learning as we go, but it's super exciting. And so that's where middle school and high school will be in 23-24. And 24 and 25 beyond. The assessment and explicit instruction in those buildings look a little different than the elementary. And so something that we'll be working on as a team is looking at what will that assessment look like, and how do the learner outcomes kind of tie into that, and how can we make that work using kind of both frameworks. Yeah, but I don't. Yeah. Oh, sorry. No, you're good. So each building gets to talk about kind of what we have done in those. Yeah.
Well, I just have one more. You'll go to our slide. I'll just read. Okay. So just a quick recap, Emily kind of did a broad overview of everyone's. Like she said, our elementary has done it the longest. Emily did it herself the first 2 years, starting with teacher practices. She listed the 10 just to give you a few examples. Things like, how does the teacher support an environment that has collaborative learning, discussion-based learning, warmth and support, self-reflection. So how is the teacher enabling a room that's going to lead to kids using these skills? So it's really teacher focused. And then also, like she said, how am I building my 5 competencies as a teacher? Because it really does start there. Then year 3, like she said, we focused on student competencies and that equity lens, which was a really fun year. And we had a good time last year at PD, and our teachers, we felt a lot out of it and grew a lot as just educators and people. And then this year, the year we're in, the teachers are doing an assessment for their students called the DESA. They're doing it 3 times a year. So far, feedback that I've gotten, I done mine because I have been on maternity leave. The feedback that we've gotten so far is that teachers are really liking it, and it's giving a lot of really detailed information, a good lens of how to look at kind of your class as a whole and as individual students. I think it's a great way that shows not only some areas of needs for students, but also what strengths they have. It does a really good job of covering both. So it's a good assessment in that way. And then teachers are also all using as an instruction piece this year. Most teachers at the elementary are doing it about once a week. Some split theirs into 2 days a week. It's about a 30, 45-minute lesson covering those 5 competencies. And most grade levels are kind of planning together and exploring it together since it's a new curriculum, and we're kind of asking them to dive in this year and try it out.
So at the middle school, we are about 2 years or so behind the elementary. So it's been kind of nice asking them for some advice and some feedback on how we can, make our SEL journey as smooth as possible. It's been kind of interesting, learning from them and watching them, because middle school, it's kind of its own beast, and we do a lot of things similar to elementary, but yet obviously the kiddos are a little older. So taking what they have done and kind of transitioning that into middle school level. So we had kind of a general overall last year. So we just kind of introduced SEL to the staff, and we did a few activities getting them familiar with the competencies. This year, I've been working with Devin Glenn, the middle school counselor, and we've been talking all about teacher strategies in the classroom. So we're not just talking about things like classroom discussions and cooperative learning, that sort of thing. So each PD, Devin and I tackle 1 or 2 teaching strategies, and we work with the staff on how they can implement that strategy into their classroom, and it's been really successful. Teachers have had a really great time learning more about it, and it's nice because teachers are able to go to that and take ideas and bring them into their classroom right away. Sometimes we sit in PDs and we're like, oh, this would be great, but I need a week to plan this, but we're able to give them something that they can take and put in their classroom right away, which has been really great. I've gotten a lot of good feedback from that. So as Emily and Randy talked about, in the future, we're looking more at actual explicit instruction in the middle school and some sort of an assessment. I don't think it'll look exactly like the elementary, but something along the same lines.
In the same way, the elementary and middle school are their own thing. The high school is very much its own thing when it comes to SEL, not because SEL is not important at high school, but because the older the kids get, the less formal programs seem to be available, and yet it's super, super important. So our first year was cut pretty short for SEL. We did some introduction into what SEL is, but we really dug into social emotional learning with adult PD last year. And our biggest focus last year was really focusing on what the competencies were and how they attach to the PD that we've already done in the district. So one of the main things that you need to do with high school teachers is help them understand how it attaches to what we've already been doing with our professional learning and make the connections. So we talked a lot about how the competencies and their own social emotional learning matches with some of the things that we're already doing in the district, and kind of brought all of those things together and continue to tie those all together, especially as we continue to work on executive functions as a whole in the high school. So we talked about executive functions as adults and social emotional learning as adults last year, and really got to know the competencies. This year, we are working on those instructional practices, and we've been focusing in on the instructional practices and then intentionally planning how to implement those practices. So giving time to plan and implement those. And then we're also trying to make it a direct connection to the work that we're doing with standards-based grading. So the second half of our year is going to be really focused on how can we use formative assessment practices in a social emotional lens. So attaching social emotional learning to formative assessment practices, again, so that it's all fitting together instead of feeling restricted. So as we continue to look to the future, the biggest thing is when we think about that stool and we think about like direct instruction, that explicit instruction, and then that integration. Explicit instruction at the high school level isn't as easy to come by, I guess. There are some programs, but it's not as easy to come by. And what it looks like at the high school level is getting really comfortable having explicit instruction conversations with your students. So when you're having a conversation with your students and you say, hey, let me step back for a second and have a conversation with you about why it's valuable to have conversations, or why is it valuable to take perspectives? Why do you think we take time to intentionally do this in the classroom? That's actually explicit instruction. And so getting teachers used to having those like zoomed out conversations is going to be our focus on explicit instruction and how to have those around the competencies, which will be what we're kind of focused on.
So here's our lunch. Before I want something that I like to have people do when I'm presenting kind of like SEL 101 is if you look at that wheel, that paper that I gave you with the wheel, and on the back of it, it has examples of what each of those competencies include. And if you had to pick one of those that your own children or your closest coworker would never ever develop, which one would you pick? Generally, I won't spend your time, but generally most people kind of are like, can't really pick, don't really want to work with somebody or raise a child without one of those competencies. And nobody's ever done. We're all working on social emotional learning all the time, even as adults, we're never done. And so if you look at those and you go, yeah, I want my children to develop all these, and I want to work with people who have these skills. We start to realize that these are just as important, if not sometimes more important, than math and reading. And those, don't get me wrong, are very important. Academic and social emotional learning all go together. It's just social emotional learning is learning. Academic learning is social emotional learning. And so to look at it as a separate thing would be the wrong thing to do. So looking how it should be, how it can be integrated into academics and how we teach, I think is essential. And so we picked this quote: if a child can do advanced math, speak 3 languages, or receive top grades, but can't manage their emotions, practice conflict resolution, or handle stress, none of the other stuff is really going to matter. So that's why we picked that lunch for you, because we really felt like that and hit what we were hoping that you took away from this today, understanding about social emotional learning.
I can see here at the school, you have a captive audience, the instructors, the teachers, and the students. But looking at your school, you've got parents and families. How do you do outreach in the sense that, and I can tell you as a parent that was fortunate enough to marry a tiger mom that made sure the kids did well in school, that bullet points are just a wonderful thing. How do you deliver this conceptual? You're dealing with modeling behaviors to get improved academics and behavior in the classroom and peer interactions. So how do you take it to the parents and the parents?
And are you meaning like SEL, what it is?
Yeah, I guess, if you could sit there, put a piece of paper in front of parents here to have the children take this home, look at this, this is what we're doing. And when you hear this term being spoken to, this is what we're talking about.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. And one of the things, like in our parent nights, we did show what social emotional learning is. We showed them the wheel, kind of talked about it, and I had sent out a spreadsheet that gives examples of what they can do at home with their children to develop different competency areas. Children's books that they can read, books that they can read as adults, activities they can do with their children. Also, I think.
I'm sorry if I put you on the spot.
No, that's
It's just
okay.
like,
This is
it
my
really-
passion. I could talk about this all day.
feel free.
No, and I think that, conferences, there's opportunities, and that's definitely an area that we're working on, because if you look at that wheel, there's different rings on the outside, and it's kind of like community, families, within the classroom, what can you do? Within the school, what can you do? With families, what can you do? In the community, what can you do? And I think we're taking those pieces slowly and trying to figure out how can we best reach families and help people understand what social emotional learning really is. We're doing some social media posts this year. In the elementary, we sent out some newsletters 3 years ago, probably now, about what it is, what that looks like, what it looks like in school, what it can look like at home. So that's actually one of our goals for this team this year, is to do some parent education, more parent education around that.
And I think too, like, part of engaging the community too is just also pulling the community into what we're doing with your kids. And so I know, like, in Emily's classroom and in my classroom, like, both of us do like project-based learning. And so if you've got kids in our classroom and you come to like one of our like exhibition nights or something, then you probably had your children experience like coming in to our classroom and us model what collaboration looks like. And you've got to see what collaboration between, you know, kids that don't maybe normally hang out looks like. And so we start modeling for you, like, here's what it can look like for these kids to develop skills that you might not normally see, because, and so like you can also model what we're doing in the classroom and pull those parents into skills that we're building. So it's not explicit instruction of parents, but it's also like engaging them into what we're doing.
I think just a lot of parents have, you know, a genuine concern. It's just like, is there anything that I don't know that I could easily implement if I've been made aware of it? You know, that, and I think you see that when you talk about your conference nights and you get a chance to talk to parents. You don't get enough parents in, frankly. It's usually it's the parents that don't necessarily need to come in. It's the parent and the kids are doing fine. But I guess I was just wondering, just, you know, looking back, not having children in the district anymore, it's just like, well, how would I do this? How would the chitties do this? If, you know, I didn't email you, pass you with that, or, you know, have these kind of handouts and everything. It's just like, I figure that you're counting on them to be a contributing partner. I just wondering how you get them.
Except they've already full of ours.
Yeah.
She did mention that the elementary is trialing also with that DESA, and we've always, of course, done conference forums at the elementary level, and each teacher has kind of used their own way to show the parents how their child's doing in class, but we're hopeful to use the DESA to create more of a universal, and it will give parents feedback on the competencies, or at least how their teacher rated them with pretty specifics, you know, not just like your child struggles with self-control, but maybe more like nitty gritty, like what they see in the classroom, and that would be more like universal. So it would look the same if you had a kindergarten, third grader, and fourth grader, you kind of see the same thing all the way throughout. Also, as your kid progresses, it would be more universal. So like from year to year, you have more of a universal thing. You see, oh, they're growing in this area, or like we're still working in this same.
So the buildings are handing off to each other in that respect. Well, it's, I mean, they transition through, and I get where you have
Correct.
different age groups have with different behavior issues, and I was just wanting to know, as they transition, as we do to implement this K-12, I mean, is there any follow-up in the sense that a teacher that takes an elementary student into middle school knows what they were doing on the elementary side of it? Not there yet. It's okay to say that.
So as far as like the assessment part, no, we're not doing, middle school's not at the assessment part because they're not ready for that yet.
Okay.
But I don't do report cards, but on report cards, I know that we have had social emotional skills listed on there, not as extensive as the DESA is. I know middle school does that, high school connects it to the learner outcomes. So in some sense, there's social emotional learning assessed or reported to parents in some way. But yeah, we're looking to streamline that. It may not be exactly the DESA for everybody. It could be, it is a K-12 assessment. But that's one of our next goals, is to look at what does explicit instruction look like for our secondary, and what does assessing that look like for our secondary. So part of our next.
As far as the learner outcomes go, have any patterns been identified for what the students have been, like any gaps in their learning? And have you guys identified how you might better
just took our second round of tested data today. We finished assessing the second one in December. And so now we have it all the data back. And we're looking at building wide, what's our lowest category? And for example, our lowest category building wide was goal-directed behavior. Within goal-directed behavior, there are probably 8 or so questions that we can kind of look at, what's really needed. I did a crosswalk of the learner outcomes along with the social emotional competencies, the Iowa competencies, last year maybe. And so kind of crosswalks, where do they overlap, and haven't quite done that with Odessa, but we're kind of working on all those pieces to put them together. And yeah, what's missing? Creativity was one that I felt like was kind of missing, and as far as, because that one's on the learner outcomes, and how do we really address that in emotional learning? It feels a little bit different. So that one was the area that was lacking. So we are doing some kind of crosswalking on different data points that will help us find that. In our next elementary PD, for example, we'll be looking at what areas are lowest in our building, what classrooms, what's the lowest in each classroom. The teachers will be disaggregating their own data, and then we'll make a tier 2 intervention plan to address those areas that have gaps.
Generally speaking, do the teachers feel supported enough to kind of do the explicit instruction, like you have the time where you know what to do?
I think so. We'd like to think so because we're kind of easy, but the time is always, no matter what, it's always going to be a struggle, but you make it work. I think our teachers from the first 3 years have seen the value in SEL, and that's key, because if the value isn't there, then yeah, something can always be taught every day, right? There's never enough minutes. So I think our teachers really have seen the value in it. I guess that maybe the feedback, get her like overwhelmed feedback of like, I don't understand this type of actions. And part of the next PD also will be explaining, because we're still kind of learning that the TSS model, and what does that look like for you as a classroom teacher in your classroom, and me as a school counselor doing a tier 2 small group. So we're going to be going over that too, so that they become more familiar with what options they do have and what that can look like. So hopefully they'll feel even more supported after Monday is our next one. So it's kind of, it feels like a snail's pace when we talk about PD. Like, we want to just go, but we know the value of kind of taking things slow and supporting teachers as they go. To them, and, well, new to us too, but just making sure that they do feel the support and have the resources that they need to move forward, and not just here's information and go do stuff. Because I know in PDs, when I get that, I'm like, how? And so we want to support them. We give a lot of work time, we give a lot of ideas, resources to be able to do stuff.
Okay, so you talked about, I want to know more of the older end, middle school, high school. I know we're not there yet, but how do you find more time, especially like in the high school? I know middle school, but the more they grow up, this happens where they jump around from classroom to classroom. So which class, which subject is doing what? Is it going to be their homeroom? How are you going to delegate what you're teaching? And like, is that going to be communicated? How is that communicating through staff? And then also, what are you going to do with people like juniors and seniors when they have online courses? And I know I have people who are not even at school, or like they're maybe at school for 2 periods. How do you teach them these skills as well? And when do you find that time?
Yeah, so I can talk about the high school, but that's where it comes back to again, our explicit instruction is going to look different. So we have to remember we've got kids who are growing up through a program, and then we've got kids who are going to be going through a program, and those are going to be 2 different gaps, right? So like, for instance, we've got students who are with me as freshmen right now, so they're like getting it right now, where I'm working with them and we step out and I say, why do you think I'm having you do this right now? And then I point to my pretty posters, because I like everything pretty in my classroom. And I point to my posters and I say, like, let's look at these. What kinds of skills are we working on right now when I'm having you do these very sciencey things, right? Because the question that drives me nuts every day in my classroom is like, why do I have to do these things? Except I have an answer and it's related to those things on the poster. And so now I get to step out and have these explicit instruction conversations about what's the point and what we're doing. And it's related to social emotional learning. We do have an answer for you guys. You're building skills, right? You're building essential skills for what you're doing. But our job now as educators is to take a step back and make sure that you're making the connection that what you're doing right now, the reason that you're taking time to analyze this text, or the reason that you are having these in-depth conversations where you actually have to exchange ideas, or the reason that Mrs. Borton's making you do stand-up meetings during our scrum for engineering is because all of these things are teaching you essential skills, right? And so if I intentionally take a step back and I have you analyze what we're doing, I think about how those relate to the competencies of social emotional learning. I am doing explicit instruction. It just looks very different than what your explicit instruction does. And if every one of your teachers does it, even if you're only with them for 3 classes a day as a senior, or 6 classes a day as a freshman, or whatever, you're getting an intense amount of explicit instruction, right? So it's just going to look different at the high school level.
So it's an instructional practices. So it's not going to be like a course, that we teach. We're not going to teach like SEL 101 or 201, or, it's going to be embedded into everyday instruction.
To kind of piggyback off that a little bit too, we do project-based learning in my classroom, and we just got done with a really big project called the Utopia project. And we just wrapped that up before Christmas break. And I sat the kids down, we had just finished the project, and I said, all right, what do you think I wanted you to learn for this project? And long story short, they had to create a fake world, and they had to give a presentation on it, and there's all sorts of facets to it. And they kind of looked at me, they're like, I looked at them, I said, do you think I want you to know how to create a fake world? Or do you think I want you to know how to work together as a group? Do you think I want you to know how to problem solve, how to communicate appropriately and accurately? They kind of had this like light bulb moment of, oh, this project wasn't necessarily about building their own utopia. It was about working together and accomplishing tasks and setting goals for themselves. And I think kind of to answer your question a little bit, Ben, is the explicit instruction, we're not going to sit a kid down and say, here's how we're going to teach kindness today. It's going to be much more individual, maybe a small group wise. Yeah, it looks different, but it's still happening. And I think that's something that we're still trying to figure out exactly, but every single class teacher should be doing it. Every single grade, it should be happening. So yeah, it's different, but it's still there. I think your question about online learners is a really good question. I think that's challenging. You guys have anything to add to online discussion?
I don't have a way to.
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges with the way things have kind of transformed over the past couple of years. The good for us, I think that we're fortunate to have great support people in place, whether it's Jody here and Elizabeth Gint, our principals, our administrators are checking in with our online learners, probably more so at the high school side, just because of credits and whatnot. But it's also taking place at the middle school side, and also with our 8-ish, 7 online learners. We send a weekly newsletter with them, have conversations. I wouldn't say weekly, but the opportunity is to have them weekly with different check-ins. Most of the check-ins typically are centered on academic performance and where they're going. But we also do have platforms for them to be able to connect with one another through the virtual world as best as possible. Again, that's one of the, I think, the challenges, especially with the way things have kind of transformed over the past couple of years.
Anybody got anything else they'd like to ask? Is that pretty good back and forth? I appreciate In fact, he felt comfortable in stepping up and answering more than just the bare minimum. That's how we learn, and it's easier to support something you know more about. Macy, thanks for asking to have this brought to us. So Macy just joined us on the board here back in November, and in the course of her second meeting, she asked the questions along these lines, and that's why you're here tonight. So she was already a forward leader in regards to how we do things at the school. I don't want to let you go tonight for on page 13. You got a word here. I've always been surprised how many acronyms I'm expected to learn in education, in new words. And Dr. Green, I've had a little bit of time with this one, but there on year 2, you got on your second bullet point, you got data competentics. Is that a word? You're making that one up.
Okay, so we don't have page.
You don't have page numbers. Okay, so middle school.
Oh, that's the
competency.
competencies.
That's
Okay.
the,
That was smart guy. I thought that's what you were typo or.
yeah, you got it.
Was my prediction. No, I thought it was just like, I thought, okay, you stumped me again. Okay, oh, that's-
So back when I was teaching, Mr. Shea, I used to always give the students, right, if you find the error, you found the error, you've got the 5 extra credit points.
Well,
It was planned.
winner, winner.
Make sure you're paying attention.
Well, thank you for tonight. I appreciate your time, guys.
Hey,
Don't,
you know, I had one question. I'll let you go, sorry about that. Does SEL dive directly into issues such as bullying or racism, or is the goal to provide more of a general framework to deal with these kind of issues?
Yeah, so some of those really big topics that are hard to address, like equity, for example, when we talk about equity in SEL, we do have to be really careful as a, you know, mostly, if not all, white middle class teaching staff, that we aren't putting our values and our beliefs on kids, we're helping them develop theirs. And so when we talk about equity with our teachers, we mentioned that last year, we talked about understanding implicit biases that we have, understanding how what racism looks like through laws and through, you know, through the system, and understanding how that affects our kids differently, and making sure that we provide windows for our kids so that they can see people that are not like them, and providing leaders, you know, making sure that we represent kids who maybe have black or brown skin, that all the storybooks that they see are all white kids with blonde hair. And so we also took a look at that last year, really hard to make sure that teachers understood that that racism and equity can be kind of unknown to us, and we have to be able to look at ourselves and go, I didn't realize I was putting that own bias on my students. And so that was a huge part of the learning, and I think we had some really difficult conversations, but really beneficial conversations. And we got a ton of compliments last year, and I know Kristen and I was, even she said, I had my eyes open to certain things and certain situations that came up regarding racism or things like that, that we were able to address in a much better way because teachers understood from a different viewpoint what we were talking about. As far as bullying, harassment, and along with racism and sexism or anything, when we talk about perspective taking and empathy, it's kind of the first step in being able to, you know, it's not just putting yourself in the shoes of that person that you're bullying, but really building the skills to be able to take perspective and build empathy. Empathy is something that you can develop and build, but it's something that happens to you. And when that doesn't happen, like, we have to continue to give the kids opportunity to build that. And so there are lots of underlying things that we have, kind of the foundation that we have to lay in order to continue to do better and teach more equity. It's not going to be a 1 year, we learned this. This is just, that's always something that we have to be careful of. And I think SEL can actually become a major problem if that's not talked about. So we really have to keep that at the forefront.
Sounds like you guys are building a really great foundation and a lot of universal learning for those kids who are showing that they're falling behind, maybe more specialized support. Has this brought about any change in the district of what supports you're giving to those when you go to level 3?
So my role changed this year. So Erin Murphy is the other school counselor at the elementary, and she has taken all the life skills classes. So that's our prevention, and of course has a lot to do with social emotional learning. So she teaches those. We have also done the universal curriculum for all students. And now my role this year, I'm much more available to do the small groups for those tier 2 interventions. Kind of talking about the classroom teachers and looking at like, okay, if your classroom has 40% of kids that are struggling in this area, what can we do about that? We also have Learning Temple has become part-time behavior interventionists to kind of meet with a team of us to get plans into place for kids that need that extra support. So we have made some changes, and I think there probably will be more changes to come. I feel like the district is always evolving, and I think that's something that Beta does really well, is kind of seeing the need and data to drive that. Yeah, we're working on that, but are never done.
Same thing. Middle school, there's a restructure with our TLC program, directly aligned with MTSS. Our PD leads in addition to SEL district PD lead, that's why we're literacy, PD lead, also works with interventions. Same thing with math, there's a math PD lead, and then also a behavior PD lead. So they're kind of working within that structure, within that system, and that's been identified here with that data. So there's been a complete transformation and restructure of that, ensuring that we're providing interventions not only for literacy and math needs, but also for behavioral needs.
I've seen some districts, they partner with community like mental health providers. Is that something that the Beta is doing or wanting to do?
We have therapists coming into our district currently in our contract this year with Central Iowa Psychological Services. We're having a hard time getting paperwork and everything going, but he's supposed to be starting next week. And I have a full caseload for him already. So yeah, 2 therapists in my building. At least 1 or 2, 2 coming, and like 2 or 3 at the high school. It's never enough, but we have it. So yeah.
One of the most disappointing, I think, parts for me in my position was last year, we had planned to use ESSER 3 funds to actually bring in an individual to serve that from a district level, K-12. Sure, I have to be able to fill that. I thought it was a great plan in place. We've seen that do that. That's disappointing. And that's just not a debate, unfortunately.
Agencies are hiring. Yeah, we're short everywhere. So. Maybe not.
Anything else? Thank you. Well, all right, Skylar, that brings us up to 4.2. I see we got some additions, corrections, and deletions on our high school course guide for 22-23.
A little bit lighter topic than, talking through SEL, but course guides coming up. We need to start preparing for, believe it or not, next year. And so that starts with going through our course guide, really looking deeply at the courses that we're offering, the adjustments that we need to make to those courses, new courses that we need to add, things like that. And in this particular case, if you remember last year's list, we really tried to put some heavy effort and emphasis last year into just kind of cleaning some things up so that we could take that and be able to move it from year to year using our Google Docs. So have a lot less changes this year than we have in the past. A couple of things at the top there, maybe the third one down, fifth one down. English prep and foundations of math are truly remedial courses that are designed to bolster and build so that way students can get onto grade level pathways. And so both of those courses we had been recommended to us by our staff members early this year that they felt that they were best served as pass-fail courses as opposed to grade level or graded courses that would impact GPA. We told them to wait and hold off, that needed to be a board decision and need to be part of this new course guide. So we've included some of those pieces in there, changed some titles around, Eastern literature to world literature, which gives us a little bit more of a broad scope. When you get into most of our literature classes, the standards that we're operating with stay the same. It's just the content that we're using, right? I kind of call it like the vehicle we're using to get to those standards. So changing Eastern Lit to World Lit gives us a little bit broader context that we can bring into the course and add some additional texts to that. There were a few changes with team sports and personal fitness, just in the course description. Our previous course description for team sports was very specific around what team sports would be played. We felt this was going to give us a little bit broader lens to it. Not that anybody probably calls us out on the specificity of what's listed on what games will be played. But essentially, Mrs. Grimm has come back up into the high school as teaching courses with us, as you know, from her transition last year, and just wanted to provide really the context of what she's trying to do, which is students are like leading that effort into where they would like to see team sports go. The personal fitness course, we added some components of health initiatives, healthy eating, healthy lifestyles, and the intention behind that being that would likely become or transition into our second health offering. Health obviously is just our first, general health is our first offering. But by incorporating some of those health components into personal fitness, which fit very nicely, honestly, into it, that could become our probably second health offering that was needed to be offered. The state requires us to offer two. We currently offer Health 1 and Health 2, but by doing this, we see this as probably a little bit of a better pathway for students to get some of that health information. Adaptive PE also went under just a few changes. Adaptive art, music, and PE is really designed as a mentoring process for our high school students to mentor students who may have severe and profound cognitive disabilities, who are part of the middle school, some of those grade levels. And so we wanted to really emphasize in the description that this isn't art, music, and PE for you high school kids, right? Like your process in this is that you're a mentor and that you're supporting and that you're a part of learning and guiding some of our students who need some additional supports to be able to acquire that curriculum. So those are some of like the big changes that I felt like were on there. You roll your way down. We did lose some dual credit classes. When Mrs. Anandson retired last year, she was certified to teach some dual credit courses, fashion, textiles. We're still offering some of those courses. We just can't offer those courses with dual credit through DMAC, which is unfortunate, but unfortunately, there's just not a lot of people who have that ability to teach those dual credit classes. Career studies and social emotional studies were courses that were proposed to us in January of last year, and they were proposed to us by Catherine Carney, who has since left the district. We did keep those courses on the roster. Sorry. For some reason. We did keep those courses on the roster to see if we would get interest in them this year, and we just didn't have a lot of interest. Not very many kids were taking those on. Not without good effort. Catherine pushed the courses when we did our registration process last year. We just didn't have the interest once everything kind of shook out in terms of the registration process. Updated DMAC course list, updated our NVENT course list, RAI, Regents Admissions Index, that information was just updated to make sure we have the most current information that's there, same with NCAA. And at the end, we do provide some pathway information. Just like a thing of mine, I didn't like that it was called rich. So I changed the wording to enrichment on some of the pathway pieces. And then we have three pathways that students, probably 4 pathways that you can get through to take math. And they were called in the past minimum and general. The minimum pathway included foundations of math, which is that remedial course that we talked about, or I mentioned earlier, then Algebra 1, 1A, which is really a significant remedial track, and felt like we needed to be honest about, that's not our minimum requirement, that's our most remedial requirement. When we also have students who are going through and potentially taking Algebra 1A, Algebra 1B, and then getting to geometry, it also be kind of a slow down track. What we really like to see is the vast majority of our students, which we do, are taking our general math trajectory, which is algebra to geometry to algebra 2 in their freshman, sophomore, and junior year. It keeps us on track for them to be able to look at their college opportunities, whether that's 2-year or 4-year. It also keeps us on track in terms of what our students are being assessed over, because it generally follows this track of algebra. And then their sophomore year, they really start to bring in some geometry through ISASS work. And then they go into a little bit deeper algebra levels in Algebra 2. Also, Algebra 2 is pretty important for kids to be successful in the math components of the ACT. So getting to Algebra 2 by the time you get to that junior year really helps you be, gives you the best opportunity to be successful on your ACTs for those students who are looking at 4-year universities.
I guess this is Barbara, somebody says, anybody got any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. For teachers, in order for them to teach classes where the students can get a dual credit for that, is that something that the district traditionally supports, or is that something the teacher does on their own?
Generally, it's something that a teacher does on their own, and they do it through a master's program. So I'm going to wade into this without having the bulletproof answer for you, right? Like the guaranteed answer for you. Most of the time, a lot of our educators go back to get her master's program. My wife, for instance, she went back and got her master's program. She went through and she has a master's in education. Well, that's a great program to have, but that doesn't allow you to teach dual credit offerings through DMAC, Marshalltown Community College, Iowa State. Those dual credit offerings are based on if you went back to get a specific master's in that particular area, which would allow you to do that, right? So if I was a math teacher and I went back and I got my master's in mathematics, I would be able to teach dual credit classes. But if I go back and get my master's in education, I can't teach dual credit. And so most of the time, all the additional opportunities that our staff members take on to go back and get or attain master's programs, it's not something that the district provides for. Obviously, we're happy to have that. We think it creates better employees, people who are more invested, learn more, ready to meet student needs. But it kind of depends on what direction they choose to take as to whether or not they can offer dual credit courses.
I'm guessing this is updating the 21-22 course guide, correct? Just before I ask my question. If going off that, I don't know if you have it corrected, but when it talks about jazz band on page 22, it says it's at 7:10 a.m., which is correct. And then in the description, it says it starts at 7:30. So that's just a little issue.
I knew you were going to have something.
Yes. And then on page 23, it says that we have purple and gold choir, which are now combined into one choir.
Yeah, and so a couple of things with that, right? The jazz one, I will have to get corrected. The purple and gold choir, I don't necessarily know that it hurts us to keep it in that particular, the way that it is currently set, because I think we flip-flop back and forth sometimes between our numbers and whether or not we offer 2 or we offer 1. In this particular case, we were really interested in getting our choir and band into one block, right? We had this conversation last year, right, Ben? And so Mrs. Dumbaugh actually said, hey, I'm interested in taking all the choir students on in one period for a year or two, see how things go. If my numbers start to bubble, we may have to bump back to the point where we have 2 different choir offerings. And so I'd like to keep them both in there at the current time. We know, or we have a pretty good belief that we'll be able to offer just a single choir for next year again, unless there's something crazy that happens with the numbers, which we don't really predict. But in time, I believe we're going to come back to the potential for needing to have 2 choirs again, just kind of why we left it the way that it was in the course guide.
Okay, sounds good. Also, just an idea, you can totally just say no to this. Or when it lists the organizations and clubs, there's some of those I believe do not exist anymore, so editing that just to double check. And also checking who the sponsors or teachers are for those clubs possibly would be helpful, especially since like we tried doing a club fair this year to try to get people interested, but if people look at this and it just says what clubs we have, but doesn't give them any other information, I think at least adding the staff member in charge of that would be helpful and maybe their email.
Yep.
And then I've just basically been skimming through this past 5 minutes. Some of the music classes, I don't know if you want to talk to either Dumbo or Barker about adding words like upon request. So classes like music theory, music appreciation, those classes are not put on the schedule. But like I take it because I asked, I was wondering if you want to talk to those and seeing if you can add upon request on them since they're not usually on the schedule, but are per individual.
Yep.
And that's all for now.
But you know where to find me then, so.
Yes. We are well served to have you, Ben. Well, after that, anybody else got any follow-ups?
Hey, just a real briefly, we don't have to dive in too much, but can you expand a little bit on the thinking behind moving a course from being graded to being pass-fail?
So there's not very many that are set up that way. In my, I think there's only, at this point, I think there's only 3 that are like courses that you would choose to take. I'm more reluctant to do it unless there is a really, really clear rationale as to why. In this particular case, why we chose to do it here, again, kind of goes back to the remedial nature of English prep and foundation of math. We're going to work through standards with students that we know full well are going to be below grade level. Now, we have learners who are in those courses who are also likely below grade level. But in the event that you take a 9th grade math class as foundations of math, say you knock it out of the park taking lower than your current grade level standards, we didn't feel like that was just like a justifiable way to impact an overall GPA for students who are a part of class rank and a whole bunch of different things like that. And that's not necessarily as big of an issue here and at Nevada because of the work that standards-based grading has done over the course of the last 5 years, where it might be in other places. But I also think it really hones down for our teachers who are teaching some of those types of remedial courses. Do you get it or do you not? And it keeps that really, really clear connection to, do you get it at an A level or a B level or a C level? And the reality is, when we get to that level of that remedial nature of what we're working with, it's, do you get it and are you ready to move on or not? And it just really clears it up and just makes it very, very apparent. You either got this or you don't have this, and allows those teachers to be able to move forward with some of those things. Not sure that really answers your question, but that at least gives kind of some background as to the how and why about what that pass-fail comes into. The only other place that I see it used is in a really funky class like creative writing. And creative writing is really trying to get students to dive into that writing process and make failures. And, it just really get chewy with the work that they're doing. That's the only other place that we really see that come in the course guide.
That helps, thank you.
Yep.
Dan? No one in the swing at a bend, got it rocking.
Oh, yeah.
He knows where you were. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. And the action agenda, let's try to knock through this. We've got a meeting after the meeting, so. Okay, board, come on down, 5.1, science trip proposal.
I'm back.
Next time.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and do those. All right, so I'm Katie Borton. I've already talked to you guys once, but I don't do well staying put, so we'll see how this goes. My students like know this about me too, but I teach at the high school. I teach the freshman science, so I have the pleasure of teaching nearly all of the students. It's one of my favorite things about being a freshman science teacher. I wanted to come and talk to you guys today about an opportunity that I had to take students. I see a typo on the first slide. So if you're gonna ask me what opportunities are like, but I see the typo already. All right. This is the perfectionist in me right there. Okay. This last summer, I had the opportunity to take students on a trip. So I wanted to talk to you guys about what I did with students this last summer, and then talk to you about my hopes and dreams for the future. Okay, so yeah, I wanted to update you on the trip that I took this last summer and get a chance to talk to you about things in the future. So first thing I should tell you is that COVID changed my plans. So originally, Dr. Hartman had approved a trip for me to take middle school students to Orlando, Key Largo, and Miami on a summer trip when I was still the instructional guide, and I was teaching about half of the sixth grade science students. So I was the instructional guide for the middle school before I decided to take the full-time freshman science position at the high school. So while I was at the middle school, I was like, I want to take kids on an experience to go do science, and she approved this trip. And then COVID happened, and it was like, yeah, so you're not taking kids anywhere, right? And so we delayed a year. And when we delayed a year, some of those kids ended up moving up to the high school. So it ended up being some of the students I was teaching, which is kind of fun. So I took 13 students this summer to Miami, Key Largo, and Orlando. There were 6 adults that came with me. 2 of them were teachers. One was Mrs. Cornelius. Some of the families that were planning on coming with us decided to drop out with the delay in the trip, but 13 of the students ended up going. So I'll show you some pictures in a second, but we went to multiple national parks. We went kayaking, snorkeling. We got to do Universal Studios and the Kennedy Space Center. So we had some really crazy and incredible experiences together. So I asked students for some quotes. And after I told them, no, I need better quotes, because the first one I got was like, eating lobster with the boys. I had to say, like, could you actually like give me some details about the trip? Here's some things they had to say about their experiences. So I should tell you, I was shocked when parents told me, like, yeah, I'm sending my kids with you. They've never been out of Iowa. I was like, excuse me, what? You're sending children with me who've never been out of Iowa. They've never flown on a plane before. That was one. Like, I'm in the airport with some kids, and they were like, yeah, my kids have never been on a plane before. And I was like, okay. So if they freak out, and I was like, yeah, I got this. This is great. And it's good because I had a relationship with them. Again, being the freshman science teacher at this point, I had been with them for a whole year, so it worked out fine. But we did some pretty incredible things. So you can see a glass bottom boat there. We were looking at the coral reef, Universal. There's pictures of us in the middle of Everglade National Park. You can't tell in that bottom picture, but they had just like massively attacked me with pool noodles. So like all sorts of crazy experiences that we got to have together. And there's their quotes. So students had to learn that 5 pounds of lobster is not that many pounds of lobster. And it was not life experiences. So those are some of their quotes as students. And here are some of the quotes from the adults as well. We all had pretty incredible experiences. We actually got to interact with dolphins. Several of my students had never seen the ocean before. That was probably my favorite memory, like walking out onto the beach and seeing the faces of kids who had never actually seen the ocean. So you can see one gentleman there, like giving a big thumbs up because he was like mind blown, getting to step in the ocean for the first time. And when some people saw the list of the kids that I was taking to Florida with me, they said, you must be crazy. And I was like, it's fine, like I'm gonna be all right. And it was incredible. We had an incredible time. So so what I am asking for, I guess, is permission to continue taking kids on trips. And the reason I want to ask you guys for permission is I would like to talk to kids about these trips in the building. And I know in the past, people have tried to do like Explorica trips. This is through company Explorica. And they have done them outside of the building. And I don't love the idea of doing things outside of the building because I don't feel like it's equitable, because then I'm only getting the opportunity to share with kids that I have a connection to the parents outside of school. And then I'm only getting the opportunity for those parents to share to the other parents. You see what I'm saying? And so like, it's only spreading to a small group of kids. And if you were to look at the group of kids that came on this trip because I was able to share it in school last time, it wasn't necessarily the people that you would expect. A lot of parents chose to say like, hey, family members, this is what my kid really wants. Would you contribute to this for like a Christmas gift or something? And what I'm proposing would be next summer. So if I got the chance to start talking about this now, you would have time to kind of start thinking about and planning for the spending for it. Why a STEM trip? Because I think they should be purposeful. I think it should be an opportunity for kids to go and experience something that they may not get a chance to experience before. So the 3 opportunities that I showed you in the back, there are 3 separate opportunities. There is one in Orlando, so essentially doing the exact same trip that we already did. There's another one in California. And then there's one to Puerto Rico. They're about all the same cost and about all the same length of time. They all have focuses on going to national forests and getting kids different experiences with different types of science experiences that they probably would not get here in Iowa. It just gives them an opportunity to connect with different people. One thing I really appreciated is every one of those students who gave me a quote said, I got the opportunity to hang out and build bonds with people that I wouldn't have spent time with before. And I think that's fantastic. And it was really cool to watch as well. I know one concern about these kinds of trips was that there is already some trips that have happened before, and what's the conflict with doing the same kind of trip? And so that's why I thought I'd offer different destinations. If there was concern about doing Orlando again, because of like the band trip or something like that, I can choose a different location. My biggest heart here is making sure that our students have an opportunity, for those who would like it, to do something different. And I would like to be able to promote that within the school setting. And then I would prefer to kind of set it on a track every couple of years, doing something so that we can more formally plan for it instead of kind of being at random. So this is me like speed talking, because you guys have lots of things going on. So there we go, questions. Any questions? For me.
So you identify a pool of students that would be interested in this. And then you would make some sort of
So I guess there's a couple of ways that I think I would go about this. So most likely the other teacher that would be going with me would be Mrs. Kane. So they do an 8-to-1 ratio of teachers. So as long as there are 8 other teachers, 8 other students going, they would have another teacher definitely go, and then any adults that want to sign up can go as well, right? So I probably talked to Mrs. Kane, and then I wanted to talk to you guys because I know one concern has been in previous experiences or talk about these kind of trips would be, do we need to choose a different location because of a band trip or something like that? I personally think the trip to Orlando, Miami, and Key Largo is very different than the band trip, but if there's concerns about that, that would eliminate one of the 3 options, and I would do something different. So I don't know if I would take a vote as much as just start thinking about, here's what I would plan on doing, like maybe this year, and then like 2 or 3 years later, here's when I would think about doing, you know what I mean, and set up a.
you know, if that would STEM opportunities would be present.
Yeah, so they kind of, Explorica has set relationships with each of those. And so they kind of, I tell them, here's what I want to do with my students. And then they come back to me and say, here's the kind of opportunities that we can offer. And we like go back and forth a little bit. Yeah, yeah.
Are you thinking like a 2-year rotation?
I don't know if I haven't decided that. I was between a 2 or a 3-year rotation, I guess, based on the feedback that I was going to collect here tonight and then talking with Christian in the future. So, yeah. In some ways, I could see 2 years being valuable based on the parents that I talked to and that went on the trip with their students. but also in some ways I could say 3 years being valuable. So I don't know, for my own planning purposes and not being gone every year.
Is there a minimum number of students you need to have to make a trip like this work?
A minimum number of students. I don't know if there's a minimum number. I think I probably have to have at least 6 students. I don't think that would be a super hard thing to do.
Does the cost change at all with the more people that go?
The cost doesn't drop, but what happens is like, there's different opportunities we can offer. So like I said, for every 8, like you have to add a teacher, chaperone, or whatever. And then we can also start to figure out, like, can we offer scholarships to students and things like that, or incentives. There's also ways to do fundraisers. I haven't taken that out because that seems really concerning to me, like how to take that on or how to approach that. And so I feel like I would leave that to however students want to handle individually raising, dealing with their own funds.
What is the cost per student on this trip?
What?
What would be the cost per student on it?
It says it on the back. It's about $3,000. And that includes their food, their travel, and their stay.
Oh,
So it says it on the back of each trip. I think for some reason, and it's actually showing you the wrong date because it's showing you this summer because we put it together. But it includes, it tells you exactly what it includes kind of on the back. So for California, it's 2,665, and that's for, I think ours was the 7 with excursions. And that was the cost. So
you have, this will be self-funded by the students, and they all say
yes,
you're just looking for the school commission.
yeah, just to share the opportunity.
Not so much to travel, but to promote this and communicate with students in the school buildings. We've had similar requests come to the board before to do that. This is essentially an outside trip, but Mrs. Gordon is asking, can I promote this and have meetings with students or parents in the school setting and school facility?
I guess I'm at a loss to say why she couldn't. Do you have anything to say otherwise? Dr. Gray.
No, the board has approved a couple of years ago, Mr. Hoffman had a group go in the middle school, very, very similar as they requested.
So I guess that means any trip that must be promoted within the walls of the school or using school resources would need permission from the board. Is that what?
Yeah, this would not be a school sponsored trip,
Right.
but if you want to promote your outside trip and communicate about it within perhaps either the school day or after school or before school within the school facilities, we brought those to the board before. Band vocal trip is a little bit different in that it is scheduled every so many years. It is an outside trip in terms of type of group you would go through. But that one's a little more connected to the school because there's often a performance-based component to it. And there's usually a fundraising component to it. So that was a little bit different than maybe the one that Mr. Hoffman brought or this one. But this one's essentially an outside trip. Mrs. Borden wouldn't be doing it as a school employee. She would like to be able to communicate to our students and use our facilities, perhaps to have a meeting.
And that's different from the last time, the last trip, right?
Well,
So-
last time I did communicate within school and stuff, but that was approved as a.
So that one I was not aware of, and as she said, Dr. Hartman said, sure, go ahead and use the school facility. After the fact, we said, hey, we typically bring those to the board. You're gonna use, school facility, school resources, promote outside trips, so.
So this is just what a pro forma exercise, basically, I can say we're already doing it, you're just looking for the word.
Well, we have done it in the past. That particular trip that she spoke of, I nor the board was aware of at the time.
And I didn't know. that.
Not
I'm
us,
sorry.
I think that this is a great learning opportunity, particularly to the kids who don't have the opportunity to do these kind of trips with their families. So just more of a comment, an equitable lens. Yeah. I would be curious to see, I know it's a lot of work, but to put in that fundraising component somehow, whether that's student-led, community partnerships, asking community if they want to sponsor some scholarships, something, especially for those students who just don't have the means across their families.
So the only reason that I hesitated on that is I know then I would have to get more approval, right, for any fundraising. I'd have to get approval on stuff like that. So that's the only reason I hesitated on any fundraising efforts. So.
Yeah, that's the difference too. The band vocal one tends to be a little more, although they use an outside group, it's more of a school sponsored activity because there's the performance component. They do the fundraising component. When they do the fundraising component, one of the things that they have to keep in mind is that when they raise funds, they're raising funds as a group, not as individuals. So if you raise $10 and I raise $0, we're both getting $5, right? So that one's a little more connected than this one.
But is it still possible for us to, if we went down that road, to discuss fundraising?
Oh, sure, it's possible, yeah.
You also mentioned the possibility of scholarships. Was that in existence last time where there's scholarships?
I didn't have enough students last time. Yeah,
So what would the source be for scholarships?
that comes from Explorica.
Florida, so they have scholarships.
So what happens like when you have in between numbers? So like at certain breaking numbers, you have to add a staff member, right? Because they require a certain number of staff members to go with you once you hit certain breaks. So like if at 8, I have to be there. At 16, I need to add another teacher. At whatever, I'm not doing math right now because my brain is smart. But the next number, thank you, is Mr. Lopez said he would come. So like I have another teacher that agreed for those dates to come. If I needed another teacher to come with you. I would prefer to have a school employee come with me just because it makes things a whole lot less messy. As like the spots that they open up as your official chaperone spots. And then they have those at breaks at like 8 that they require you identify a specific person. But then those in between spots, there's like just money that you can assign to people. So does that make sense? So like if there's an in between, like I've got 6 kids, then I have extra money available and I could use that money to scholarship towards a person.
Jump to the end. You get approval from the board as of tonight, what are you doing tomorrow?
Well, then I'm gonna go back to Explorica and say none of these flyers are up to date because all the dates are wrong.
Oh, what are you gonna try, just to,
Yeah.
Macy's point, to find out how much interest actually exists, you know? It's one thing to try to scholarship up for people with less means than others. I get that. I hope that ability exists.
Yeah.
But if we're not getting really anybody rising up, and it's just you and 7 other students,
Yeah.
that might be it.
So, I would probably start sharing the information as soon as possible, because in my experience before, you want to share with parents as soon as possible, because parents like time to plan for that kind of stuff.
And is this just sharing across your class, across the grade level, across the building?
I would probably ask to share it just my class and then Mr. Lawler's classroom, because those are the 2 grade levels that I taught most recently. So the sophomores, and then it'll just kind of
How many students are you talking about there?
like directly talking to.
Well, you said yours, Mr. Waller.
So my group of students, I teach 140 students,
Mr. Waller had.
and Mr. Lawler probably has like 40 or 50 students
Pretty big
per
pool.
semester, yeah. But it'll disseminate. I mean, I anticipate, like, anybody's invited, but I directly would talk to that group of students, because it's a pretty easy group of students for me to talk to, because our 2 groups are connected. That would be my plan.
So my understanding is that since it's through Explore, kind of all the payments go through Explore.
Yeah.
And Dr. Gray, I guess this is kind of for you, is there anything that would prohibit a local business or something from paying for students?
Yeah, I guess I don't.
Yeah, the agreement is directly with Explore and the families.
Okay.
It's not involved at all.
So in reality, we're just giving permission for you to talk to the students. I think
And
providing an opportunity for our students kind of see the issue or problem with, I think that's,
Well, this is
the
the
more
initial.
opportunities we can provide our students, the better.
Yeah, they've already done it.
Correct. So, well, we've already done it past through a variety of means.
Or email or hold meetings.
What do you say? Action item.
Move to approve the science book that we were talking about.
Second.
I second that.
Okay, we have a motion to second to approve the science trip proposal as presented to us tonight by Mrs. Porter. Any further questions or concerns? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Aye. Thank you, Mrs. Porter. Safe trip home. Good luck on this one.
Thank you guys very much.
Wouldn't mind if you just put a little blurb in that Dr. Gray can share with the board, see what comes of this. I'm sure VC you probably want to see how much interest gets generated. I would too. Thank you. Next up, 5.2. Oh, no, not 5.2. We'll get to 5.3. Second semester course edition for our high school talented and gifted. Mr. Einsweiler, you're back.
Yep, I am. We would like to add a tag, a student interest exploration course for second semester, starting in second semester. Again, we kept a couple of the courses that were originally under our tag program last year with a different teacher. Didn't drum a lot of interest in that. Mr. Schneiderman has taken over that program as the program kind of director. I don't know if that's the right term, right? Coordinator. And has really tried to identify how he can start to better serve some more high school students. And a lot of times our high school students in tag programs, they explore a lot of career academies or dual credit opportunities. But when it comes to our ability to really enhance that learning experience, he has really taken a strong interest into how that can happen. So this exploration piece has a couple of components to it. I want you to kind of think of it as a bit of like a self-paced type of class, if you will, right? Sort of like an independent study where Mr. Schneiderman is helping to develop and kind of cultivate a certain interest that students might have, and then meeting on a pretty weekly basis, getting some commitments from students as they work through this process to expand their learning and whatever interest that might be. And then in addition to that, This also allows Mr. Schneiderman to start to create some small groups that might have some common interests, that might have some pretty interesting connections. So that way that can either come out with learning, but it might also come out with just other things that are going to come along with our tag students. It might come into scheduling. It might come into difficult times of the year for maybe some of our gifted learners who are struggling with maybe some mental health pieces. When we come to like big testing times, things like that. Usually like they kind of rile up some of our kids who are a part of tag, really focus on those. And sometimes it can create some issues. And that came up as a need based off of some data that he collected over the course of the first semester, showing that maybe that small group component was a really good way to start to kind of make waves into our tag program and our tag students in the high school. So that's the kind of intention that's there. It's not a required course. Not all tag students have to take it, but that doesn't mean that Mr. Schneiderman is not meeting or working to meet with those individuals. This would be just a little bit more of a directed path where students could gain credits as they went through.
Is this graded?
That's a really good question.
Joe got me started thinking.
I know. You know what, I'd have to ask. I don't want to speculate on.
Well, it's just a one credit, so I guess that, I would see where you could go either way.
I believe, so here's the hard part. I want to say the answer is yes, but then the grading person in my mind says, well, what are you grading it on? What standards and how are you assessing students and those questions? So I need to ask. I spent some time with Mr. Schneiderman this afternoon, but didn't ask that question.
Okay, it'd be nice, just either or.
Yep.
Any other curiosities in regards to this proposal from anybody?
Just to reiterate, this would start in January for our students for second semester, it is part of our course guide for next year already that you would be looking to approve for next year. But we're asking for some special permission to start this in a pretty quick fashion.
So are the projects already defined or the students develop their own projects?
My interpretation and belief is that they would enter into sort of an agreement based off of some projects that students would be interested in, right? So kind of that self-driven, self-directed position to it. So it's not like come in here, here's 5 projects that I have for you. It gets really more about exploring what areas our tag students are most interested in, and maybe some of the areas that they can really start to push and accelerate themselves through some of their learning pieces. Some of our tag students are tag all the way around, right? They're really good at math, they're really good at language, they're really good readers, great writers. Some of our tag students might be very good at 1 or 2 of those things, and they may be great at another one, but it's not what they're really truly gifted in. And so giving that flexibility to not force a particular path, but allow students to really find their own acceleration path.
How many students, when you say this is available to students that are currently identified as tag students, what's that number?
I think our numbers may be a little higher than it. I'm trying to think what it'd be like 18 to 20. No.
Class.
Yeah, for class.
10.
10 to. I think the goal would be, if my memory serves me right, the goal is to be somewhere around 10% identified. I think we're a little bit above that at the current time, but I think over the course of the last couple of years, that procedure's been kind of tight there. And so it's got to be 40.
Well, is there a cap out? Say you get, a lot of people want to do is Mr. Steinman having to sort through all that.
I don't necessarily think so. And the reason I say I don't necessarily think that there's a cap on this, I don't know if you're asking if there's a cap on tag or if there's a cap
on this.
Yeah,
all of a sudden, everybody rushes to the door saying, I want to be part of this. And all of a sudden, he's got 50 kids wanting to do individual projects.
I think he'd be honestly pretty darn excited about that. I think that that's an area of that he would really like to focus on and building some of those relationships with our high school students as it is. The other thing that makes this unique is we're not talking about a period offering where you show up first period on this day, or you show up 8th period, because of the self-directed nature of it, and because that kind of independent study that we talked about as I first started off, really these small groups are going to be finding the time that works and is a common time for them. So some of our kids were taking dual credit courses, for example. Those dual credit courses are online. So they may work on their dual credit courses for a couple of periods. Mr. Schneiderman might say, hey, on Thursdays during 3rd period, would you be willing to come in here and work with me and just kind of keep this path going? So it allows for a lot of flexibility in what that might look like for students who want to take the course, because it's not fixed to one period that you have to find in your day. It has some flexibility in when you can meet with Mr. Schneiderman and when works in his day as well. So I don't necessarily know that there's a cap in terms of how many kids. I think you probably see a little bit more of a likelihood in our freshmen, sophomores. I think our juniors and seniors are probably kind of in the, I know my path, right? Like I know where I'm headed. I maybe don't see this as much of a benefit, but it's sort of a foothold in, if you will, to starting to build that rapport and that regular connection with our students, and trying to find the ways that we can push their acceleration and the places that they're most capable.
Well, I guess we can go fishing. I would recommend approval of the described high school tag course.
Motion and second to offer starting this semester, coming semester, a enhanced high school tag and gifted program. Any further questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Hearing none. 5.3, policy additions in regards to the OSHA and the employee vaccination requirements that administration wants us to start implementing.
So these are required policies that you would be adopting, emergency adoption. This was previously in the board packet. It was tabled because the court system put a stay on the OSHA ETS. It was the 6th Circuit Court recently lifted that stay, and as of today, there's no further legal intervention, so to speak. I would be surprised if there wasn't, but as of now, we need our policy to be in place so that we can meet the required deadlines for these items.
As I understand it, you're going to have oral arguments before the Supreme Court on Friday. I followed the news closely enough.
It sounded like that would be coming up. Yeah, as soon as that, we're being advised by ISB to get these policies in place in our collection so that we can meet the deadlines. Obviously, if that happens, then we will halt our Trump policy and we would hold off until further decision is made.
Somebody want to explain to me the downside of not adopting this? Anybody want to swing that?
What was your question?
And not adopting this policy.
You face some potentially serious monetary fines from OSHA. Together legalities as well.
We're already past, significantly past some of these deadlines, right? Not by our own doing, but.
Correct. They set the deadlines and they also backed off of the deadlines. You know, they halted those. The information that we got from ISB was acknowledging that those old dates are still in the policy. In fact, their verbiage here was these dates continue to be listed in the language of the OSHA rule itself, and districts should not change these dates in the policy language. OSHA simply agreed to delay enforcement of these policies as stated in their litigation.
communication update.
Does the school district have the authority to change any of the language in any of this policy?
ISB is not advising that. They're indicating that this is required policy.
Coming at this as a pedestrian approach, to me, it seems so. I don't understand why businesses that meet a threshold level of employees have, or will have a requirement, whether that's a legal ability or not, that will be determined to implement or require protocols for their employees, but businesses lying under that have not.
Well, yeah, I think that's something that the court system is
Well,
trying to decide right now. I think from our standpoint, regardless of how they end up deciding, I think it's our duty to protect the district. That this does end up being required.
And we get any comment or observations by staff in regards to doing this?
I have not had any, no.
I did not get any responses from anybody either. And I sent out the work, people that this is coming, nobody has responded. Objection or for.
I believe I included the board when I gave all of our employees a heads up prior to the break that this could potentially be coming. I did not get any responses to that.
That echoes what you said, Kevin, just to be clear.
Yeah.
No response. Option of board.
Correct.
Dr. Gray, assuming that if this were to get approved, then even though the courts will be hearing the case on Friday, would the district start collecting vaccination cards information tomorrow?
Yes, communication is, I have drafted communication to go out in the morning. That's what needs to be done and how it's done. It will be collected through our frontline, our HR software. And would be due next Sunday. And then if they chose not to, the requirements would go into place on Monday. Certainly, this is a fluid situation, but at this point, we have to operate as though it's being required and make sure that we're prepared as such.
So we don't have to have 2 readings of this?
So you'd be adopting this under the emergency policy that we have, emergency adoption. So I did include a blurb in your packet.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, so you'd be adopting this per policy 209.2.
What would be the wisdom behind moving this faster than?
If you moving it faster,
Yeah, I mean, approving it tonight rather than having a second reading.
because you don't have time to meet the requirement.
So we're already past the deadline.
They put a hold on that, but that stay has been lifted. So this is going to go into effect as of right now, unless another stay is put in place. This is going into effect on Monday of next week.
I have a question about the accommodations. On the policy, it says that employees, if they submit for an accommodation, they need to submit verification. But on the forms, it's kind of like they list a reason and then they sign. Is that enough? Is that qualified as a verification? like a physician to sign?
According to the attorney at ISB, that is enough.
Okay.
That is their interpretation.
I think the first time we discussed this is last year. We had talked about employee that has to provide proof of negative COVID test. That cost is from the employee themselves now, right?
Correct.
I think we had discussed earlier whether that was the employer or the employee that provides that cost. But that's the employee.
It is the employee.
Has there been any recommendations made if some staff choose to leave? Because they don't follow through.
I have not heard, honestly, neither I nor Kevin got any indication of that.
Just for curiosity's sake, do we have any other requirements of staff for vaccination to have an appointment here in our district?
I can't remember what proof of.
I know we got our students, we got,
Yeah,
you have a panel there.
I don't know if you remember, Brian, what's required on initial employment. I'd have to go back and look. I don't want to speak.
Well, I don't want to push you on the spot there, but it's just here we are towing a line up to the, COC is so just highly, highly unfair that somebody does not want to put something that is truly not a vaccine into their body. Yeah, they have to go weekly at their expense to prove that they're not positive. I'm sitting here having had a shot, having had COVID, to be asymptomatic and give you COVID.
I would tell the employee to either submit the vaccination proof or submit one of the waivers.
It's cold comfort. I think we're not in a position to need to be the vaccination police. And I hope the Supreme Court does the right thing for this. Loath to put our district in any kind of legal. This is one of the most distasteful things I've done in all my time on the board. This is not right. It is a motion action. We have much more of a meeting to go. This is something we can talk about, and I would welcome any further comments or observations.
Dr. Gray, I'm gonna make a motion, we do need to clarify it for policy.
Yeah, I think I would, because that would require us to come back to this, in the event that it doesn't get held up in the court system, we would be coming back to it after the third meeting.
I'll try to stab at it.
Go for it.
For policy 209.2, I move the policy addition for the OSHA employee vaccination requirement.
Second.
We have a motion. Thank you, Leander. That's a mouthful. There's a lot of content there. I get it. Boy, I hate asking for a vote on this because everything in me says don't vote for it. But you have a responsibility to the district. So we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Aye.
I will amend my vote and vote nay. So let the record reflect that we have a 3-2. So thank you. We have a 3-2 positive vote to adopt this policy immediately. Thank you for everybody weighing in on this one. It was not an easy decision to make. Let's get to the easy part, consent agenda. Anybody see anything they want to talk about? And every person. Like I said. That's unusual. Anybody take a look at the margin on the popcorn sales? If Cooper sees that there's that kind of money to be had on selling popcorn, he's gonna be more than the market. This American Legion fundraiser goes to their scholarship.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's not really a raffle, is it? It's marked as a raffle on the request.
I'm not sure. I don't know. Never been there for it. Well, I kind of have.
That's just-
After seeing Justin's signature, I feel a lot better about my own. Has Ted ever done this, soul popcorn? It's his first time for him on the girls' track. Anybody remember?
I don't recall.
So I don't remember that. But. Say that again.
I don't think in the past 4 to 5 years. 5 years, 6 years, or that young,
I thought you said 45 years.
or that. You would know that.
I heard you too. All right,
I move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
motion and second approved consent agenda, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Board member comments? I'll say it again, we have a VC, you're new to this conversation, I said it last quarter, that Ben has done nothing but impress me the entire time that he's been on the board. He's found his voice, he speaks very well and eloquently for the district in this forum and others. And I'd like to see that his time of service be memorialized. In fact, we buy a plaque, middle school filled out that needs his name on. So I would ask, don't let it just be Marty's opinion, anybody else got something to say, but I just think that he has given, and he did it tonight, Mr. Rinksweiler can tell you, he got taken to task on a few things, that's just who he is. I was expecting. You were wise to be, he looks at things in a deeper manner than you would think for a high school singer. But that said, it's one of those things that when he brings his family back and he visits the district, is I expect him to move away on us. They don't have the ability to say that this is my time, this is what I did, and let the future reflect his contributions.
The discussion at some point for us to have is how are we going to replace it?
Well, that's on Dr. Griff.
Yeah, I put it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I put it out to all students, and then I typically, if I don't get anything, I send another reminder. I think we had we did have the 1 year, we didn't have.
Right. But I mean, I think we've seen the benefits of having that student board.
Yes.
So. Identify some candidates, that'd be great. We take big shoes to fill at this point.
Very, I have nothing but impressed with that young man.
Yeah.
Anybody else got any comments? Calendar, next meeting's on the 17th, 2 weeks from tonight, hope it's warmer. It'll be, it's January, so.
Board retreat, if we
I will confirm that with all of you this week.
Okay. I didn't do, what, you sent out a new poll? I didn't do it just for that, whatever you guys check on. Schedule a big turn on mine. So.
I'll sign.
All right. We take a 5-minute break. back here. Thank you for everybody that came, for everybody that stayed. And we'll start that meeting here.
To move it to the closed session now, or wait till the-
Well, why don't we just, okay, here's a motion to adjourn.
No.
Yeah, the closed session. We have to move to closed session before we take a break.
No, or we can't adjourn, so.
I'm gonna adjourn, so after the closed session. All right, Tom, you're up.
I would be shutting it off, let's go into motion to go to closed session.
So we can make a move to go to closed session, and then we can take a 5-minute break if we want to, right?
Sure.
Okay. So I would move to move into closed session as provided in section 21.5.1C of the Iowa Code to discuss the strategy with counsel in matters that are presently in litigation or where litigation is imminent, where its disclosure would likely prejudice or disadvantage the position of the governmental body that is in litigation.
Second.
Second.
Just roll call.
Leanne?
Tom.
Aye.
Marty. Aye. Joe.
Aye.
Move to adjourn. No. Closed session. Closed session.